Under the silver haze of a Los Angeles dawn, the city seemed unaware that a single anonymous message was about to shatter its fragile calm. At precisely 7 a.m., two phones lit up in different corners of the same fractured world. One belonged to Katie Logan, the steadfast guardian of Forrester Creations' image. The other, to Electra Forrester, the rising star who had built her name on grace, vision, and her uncanny ability to make the impossible beautiful. Both women froze as the words appeared, identical in tone, phrasing, and intent. The driver who hit Luna was not who you think. That was only the surface. Look deeper, and you'll see who made her disappear. The text ended abruptly and signed, but it carried a chill that neither of them could dismiss. Katie sat in her office at Forrester, her morning coffee untouched, her hands trembling slightly as she read the message again. Luna's death had been a closed chapter, a painful, tragic event that the company was just beginning to recover from. Public sympathy had been mixed, a young designer's life cut short, a promising future gone too soon, and the complicated swirl of rumor surrounding her final days. The press had been merciless, speculating about drugs, betrayal, and emotional collapse. Katie had worked tirelessly to restore the company's credibility, positioning Forrester as both compassionate and blameless. Yet one message threatened to unravel everything she had fought to rebuild. Across town, Electra stared at her phone in disbelief. She had tried to put Luna's death behind her, though she still woke in the middle of the night, hearing the screech of tires, the crash, the echo of metal against bone. Her grief had slowly transmuted into numbness, until now. The message wasn't random. It was precise, calculated, and directed at the two women most capable of understanding its implications. Someone knew something, and worse, someone wanted the truth to come out. Electra's instincts as a creator and a survivor took over. She began tracing the message through a private cybersecurity contact she had used once before when a design leak threatened her reputation. Within hours, a partial IP address surfaced, a location on the outskirts of Los Angeles, near a stretch of road rarely patrolled, marked only by a few gas stations and forgotten warehouses. Curiosity battled fear, but the pull of unanswered questions was too strong. She drove out that afternoon, her phone clutched tightly, her pulse steadying only when she turned off the highway. At the small gas station indicated by the trace, she parked near the surveillance cameras and pretended to refuel while glancing toward the reflection in the glass window of the shop. That was when she saw her, or thought she did. The figure was blurred by distance and heat, but unmistakable in the tilt of the head, the nervous glance over the shoulder, and the faint outline of a scar tracing the jawline. Luna, or someone who could only be her. The woman moved quickly, paying in cash, avoiding eye contact, her hair shorter, darker, her body language tense and feral. When Electra blinked, she was gone, disappearing into a side street as though she had never existed. Electra stood frozen. The idea that Luna could be alive defied every fact, every report, every tear shed at her memorial. Yet the evidence was too specific to dismiss. That scar, the one she had once hidden beneath foundation after a childhood accident, was real. Luna had always been cautious, sometimes paranoid about the scrutiny that came with fame. But to fake her own death? That required power, precision, and a network. Someone had helped her, and that someone was dangerous enough to rewrite the official record. Back at Forrester, Katie's day spiraled into chaos. The board meeting that morning focused on stabilizing investor confidence and expanding into Europe. But the message weighed on her like lead. Every time she looked at the Forrester logo on the presentation screen, she saw Luna's face instead, the girl who had once stood in that same room, pitching ideas with trembling excitement, desperate to prove herself. Katie remembered how Luna had once confided in her, how she had felt trapped, manipulated, cornered by invisible forces within the fashion empire. At the time, Katie had brushed it off as creative stress. Now she wasn't so sure. She closed her laptop early and called Electra, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk," she said simply. When they met in the dim light of Electra's studio, surrounded by sketches and unfinished gowns. The air between them was thick with unspoken fear. Electra showed her the footage she'd extracted from the gas station security camera, a blurred clip of the woman's face, partially turned, but enough to suggest the impossible. Katie's reaction was visceral. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "If this is real," she whispered, "then Luna didn't die in that crash. Someone made sure we thought she did." The question that followed hung in the silence between them. Who had that kind of power? As they compared notes, a chilling pattern emerged. The prison records where Luna had supposedly been held after her conviction for vehicular manslaughter were inconsistent. One file had been sealed by court order. Another listed a transfer date without a destination. The autopsy report of the body recovered after the explosion had no dental records attached, only DNA analysis from a sample provided by family. Except Luna had no living relatives in the system. Someone had provided that DNA, and someone had ensured it matched. The deeper they dug, the more the illusion fell apart. Katie began to feel a creeping dread that this was not only about Luna. Forrester Creations, despite its polished facade, had long been a nexus of secrets. Powerful investors, political connections, and buried scandals had all coexisted beneath its gleaming glass towers. If Luna's disappearance was orchestrated to protect the company from exposure, then Katie herself, as head of public relations, might have unknowingly become part of a cover-up. Worse, her own son, Will Spencer, had once been linked romantically to Luna before her downfall. The tabloids had twisted their brief relationship into a scandal that almost derailed his reputation. If the truth came out that Forrester or Spencer Publications had helped conceal her fate, Will could become the scapegoat. In the following days, Electra became consumed by the mystery. She drove back to the gas station multiple times, questioning attendants, tracing credit card patterns, scanning social media for any trace of Luna's movements. One night, while reviewing traffic footage from nearby intersections, she found a clearer shot. Luna, stepping into a black SUV with tinted windows. The license plate was partially obscured, but a fragment of the number matched a fleet registered to a logistics subsidiary quietly owned by a Forrester business partner. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Someone within the company had arranged Luna's disappearance.
But why?
Katie's investigation, meanwhile, led her to an encrypted email buried in her work archive, a thread from the week following Luna's supposed death. It was a directive from a legal consultant advising silence on all matters related to Luna's case. The language was chillingly precise. Do not pursue inquiries regarding inmate 4720C. All communications concerning the incident are to be routed through Executive Council. The matter is closed. The sender's address was anonymized, but the authority it implied was unmistakable. It wasn't just a PR move, it was an erasure. Haunted by guilt, Katie began revisiting her own decisions during that time. Had she been protecting the company or burying the truth? Every statement she had given to the press, every carefully crafted apology, every tearful soundbite, now felt like a lie. She had told the world that Forrester stood for integrity, for beauty built on compassion. But the truth, she now feared, was built on manipulation and silence. As whispers spread within the company about an internal review, paranoia took hold. Designers avoided eye contact in hallways. Executives held secret meetings behind closed doors. Even Eric Forrester, aging yet proud, sensed that something malignant was rising beneath the surface. The brand was on the verge of another scandal, one that could destroy not only its legacy, but the families intertwined with it. Electra, caught between loyalty and conscience, grew restless. The more she investigated, the more she saw herself reflected in Luna, ambitious, brilliant, yet vulnerable to the invisible machinery that consumed individuality in exchange for perfection. She began questioning her own safety. If someone could erase Luna so completely, what would stop them from erasing her next? Her phone began receiving strange static during calls, her apartment door once left slightly ajar. One night, a note slipped under her door read, "Stop looking. You're next." Still, she refused to stop. In her heart, She believed Luna's reappearance wasn't just survival, it was a message. A warning to those who had used her and discarded her when she became inconvenient. When Katie finally confronted the board, her voice trembled but did not waver. She laid out the inconsistencies, the digital traces, the corporate shell companies. The room fell silent. Some faces registered shock, others resignation. She could see who already knew, who had been complicit. "If we bury this," she said quietly, "we're not saving Forrester. We're killing what it stood for." But even as she spoke, she knew the cost of truth. Exposing the cover-up could destroy the company and the livelihoods of hundreds. Keeping it secret, however, would damn her soul and perhaps her son's future. The following week, a leaked photograph appeared online. Luna at the gas station, blurry but unmistakable. The internet exploded. Headlines screamed about resurrection, deception, and corruption. Forrester Creations was thrust back into the eye of the storm. Reporters camped outside the building, fans speculated wildly, and protesters demanded justice for Luna. Katie's worst fear had come true. The company was now accused of staging a death to hide its role in a larger scandal. But the most devastating blow came privately. Will was subpoenaed for questioning after a journalist uncovered his past relationship with Luna, suggesting he had been the one who leaked her designs before her arrest. The implication was clear. Luna's downfall, disappearance, and supposed death were all connected to him. Katie's maternal instinct clashed with her corporate duty. She spent sleepless nights debating whether to step forward with what she knew, to protect her son by confessing her own complicity, or to remain silent and let the company shield her. Meanwhile, Electra vanished from public view. Rumors spread that she had left the country, but in truth, she was hiding, following a trail that led beyond corporate corruption into something darker. The logistics company linked to the SUV turned out to be a front for human identity alteration, a clandestine service specializing in creating new identities for clients with the means to disappear. Financial records hinted that someone had paid a staggering sum weeks before Luna's supposed accident. The payer? A trust fund indirectly tied to an unnamed Forrester stakeholder. The realization crushed Electra. Luna hadn't just been protected, she had been purchased. As the walls closed in, Katie made her choice. On a cold December morning, she held a press conference. Cameras flashed, the world waiting for a polished PR defense, but instead, Katie Logan shattered the illusion. She spoke of manipulation, of power abused, of a young woman's life rewritten to protect an empire. She confessed her own blindness, her guilt, and her determination to make amends. "We cannot build beauty on lies," she said. "Not anymore." Her confession detonated through the media like a bomb. Forrester's stocks plummeted. Lawsuits followed. But for the first time in months, Katie felt something she hadn't felt since Luna's death: clarity. The cost of truth was ruin, but it was the only path left. Days later, Electra sent her a final encrypted message. It contained one photo, Luna, standing on a crowded street in Mexico City, her scar visible, her eyes wary but alive. The message beneath it read, "You did the right thing. But this story isn't over." Katie stared at the image for a long time before closing her laptop. Outside her window, the city pulsed with life, fractured, corrupt, but still moving. Somewhere out there, Luna was watching too, waiting for the day she would tell her own story. And when that day came, Los Angeles and Forrester Creations would never be the same again. For beneath the glittering world of fashion, behind the flashbulbs and champagne smiles, the truth was simple and devastating. Beauty demanded sacrifices, and sometimes, those sacrifices came back from the dead to collect what was owed. After Thanksgiving came to an end, Los Angeles seemed to exhale under a cool, tired sky. The kind of sky that carried the weight of family gatherings, unspoken truths, and the fragile hope that tomorrow might bring peace. Hope Logan, radiant yet restless, stood at the threshold of a new storm. While the city slowly folded into its post-holiday lull, She found herself unknowingly at the center of a story that would shake both her personal life and the future of Forrester Creations. Yet, miles away, in the quiet stillness of Taylor Hayes' office, another storm was brewing, one of temptation, guilt, and human frailty. Deacon Sharp, a man who had spent his life balancing between redemption and self-destruction, sat across from Taylor that evening. The faint aroma of coffee mixed with the distant hum of the city outside, creating an intimacy that neither of them wanted to acknowledge, but both were drawn to. Deacon spoke hesitantly at first, his voice weighed down by the truth he could no longer carry alone. He admitted that despite his best efforts to make things work with Sheila Carter, something had broken beyond repair. The spark had faded, replaced by unease, and he could no longer ignore the way his heart, and perhaps his conscience, pulled him toward Taylor. Taylor, ever the calm psychologist, tried to remain detached. But Deacon's confession unsettled her deeply because it mirrored something she'd been suppressing for weeks. Since the Thanksgiving dinner at the Cliff House, surrounded by her family, yet feeling utterly alone, she had been haunted by a similar longing. Ridge Forrester's presence that day had reopened wounds she thought had long healed. She had smiled for Steffi, played the gracious mother for Finn, and the doting grandmother for Hayes and Kelly, but beneath that practiced serenity lay exhaustion and quiet pain. Every laugh had been an effort. Every toast, a reminder of what she'd lost. When Deacon urged her to talk about that gathering, she hesitated. But his voice, patient and warm, chipped away at her defenses. She found herself admitting that she had felt humiliated by how naturally Ridge had reclaimed space in that home, as though she were merely a guest in her own daughter's world. Deacon listened, his gaze steady, and in that moment, Taylor saw not the reckless man who once betrayed her trust, but someone who understood the unbearable ache of wanting more than life was willing to give. The air between them grew heavy, pulsing with unspoken energy. Their hands brushed as Deacon reached for her cup, and the contact lingered a moment too long. Taylor looked away, her heart pounding. They both knew the danger in what was happening, how easily compassion could turn into comfort and comfort into desire. But the loneliness that shadowed them both had its own gravity, and the room seemed to close in, urging them toward a decision they couldn't take back. For now, they resisted. But that resistance came with a cost, the knowledge that temptation once awakened rarely sleeps again. As Deacon left her office, Taylor's reflection in the window stared back at her, not with judgment but with fear. Because she knew Sheila Carter well enough to understand one thing. If Sheila ever sensed what was brewing between her lover and her confidant, destruction would follow. Sheila's love was a possessive force, and her vengeance had no limits. Meanwhile, Hope was unaware of the emotional powder keg building around her father. Her world revolved around the revival of hope for the future, and Forrester Creations was buzzing with renewed energy. After the chaos of the Luna Nozawa scandal and the public relations nightmare it brought, the executive team had made a firm decision. The brand needed cleansing, not through denial, but through redirection. The PR firm they'd hired was clear: turn the spotlight back to the artistry, to the heart of fashion, and to the woman whose name embodied optimism. Thus, Hope Logan became the centerpiece of the company's redemption narrative. Press releases hailed her as the face of resilience, and photo shoots were scheduled to capture her as both muse and maker. Yet beneath the glamour, Hope was grappling with something more intimate, a sense that she was performing hope, not living it. Every stitch she approved, every headline with her name in bold letters, reminded her of what she had lost. The quiet nights after Thomas's exit, the distance between her and her mother Brooke, and the uncertainty about whether she could truly lead without falling into the same emotional traps as her parents. Across town, Deacon tried to lose himself in his new restaurant venture, but his mind betrayed him. The more he thought about Taylor, the more Sheila's presence felt suffocating. Sheila had changed, or so she claimed, yet her intensity had become unbearable. She sensed something had shifted and began hovering around him, asking questions with the sweetness of poison. Deacon found himself rehearsing lies before every conversation, terrified at the moment she would discover the truth. His guilt was not just about betraying Sheila, but about rediscovering a version of himself he thought he'd buried, the man who still believed he could deserve love. Taylor, on the other hand, tried to drown her emotions in work. Her therapy sessions became longer, her office hours later, her nights emptier. But the more she buried herself in her patients' stories, the more she recognized echoes of her own. She saw herself in every woman who had chosen wrong, in every man who had justified betrayal as fate. And when she least expected it, Deacon showed up again, this time with flowers, a half-smile, and the audacity to ask for forgiveness before committing another sin. The pull between them deepened, and the inevitable began to take shape. By the time they found themselves in each other's arms, it wasn't out of lust but relief. Relief from silence, from being unseen, from years of pretending to be fine. Yet passion has a way of exposing truth, and as morning light spilled through Taylor's window, she felt both alive and terrified. Deacon was still asleep beside her, his hand resting over hers like a vow he didn't know how to keep. She turned to look at him, her mind a blur of regret and longing. In another life, maybe this could have been love. But in this one, it was a countdown. Because elsewhere, Sheila was already connecting the dots. Her instincts, sharpened by decades of betrayal, told her that something was off. When she followed Deacon one evening and saw him leaving Taylor's office, the truth hit her with the force of a blade. The woman she had confided in, the therapist who promised to help her heal, had become her rival. And Sheila Carter was not a woman who forgave. Back at Forrester Creations, Hope was preparing for a new runway show that symbolized rebirth, not just for the brand, but for herself. Her designs, infused with subtle symbolism, spoke of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of renewal. Critics began to take notice. Whispers of a creative renaissance rippled through the fashion world. Yet the closer she came to success, the more isolated she felt. Deacon missed her calls, and Brooke, still skeptical about her father's redemption, avoided the subject altogether. Hope's relationship with her team also grew tense. Deke Sharp, her trusted designer, was distracted, torn between his growing fame and the emotional baggage of his past with Remy Price. Their creative synergy began to falter, and Hope sensed that personal chaos was infecting professional focus. To make matters worse, the media began digging into Luna's disappearance from the spotlight, questioning whether Forrester had orchestrated her silence. The PR firm tried to spin it, but Hope couldn't shake the guilt of benefiting from another woman's downfall. As all of this unfolded, Taylor found herself spiraling. The guilt of her affair with Deacon began to gnaw at her conscience, not because of moral judgment, but because she saw herself turning into the very archetype she spent her life helping others escape. She knew Sheila would come for her, and when it happened, it would not be subtle. Late-night messages, strange calls, and flowers left at her doorstep began to appear, the unmistakable handwriting of vengeance. Deacon, caught between two women and his own fractured soul, tried to contain the damage. But the harder he tried, the faster the truth spread. Sheila confronted him first, in a scene that would later replay in his nightmares, her voice trembling not with sorrow, but with calm fury. She didn't need to scream. Her silence was enough to promise destruction. What Deacon didn't realize, however, was that Sheila's revenge wouldn't come through him. It would come through Hope. Hope, the daughter of the man who betrayed her and the stepdaughter of the woman who betrayed Sheila, a perfect target for the ripple effect of revenge. Sheila began to leak rumors, orchestrate subtle manipulations in the fashion world, using anonymous tips and false stories to sabotage Hope for the future. Orders were canceled, sponsors backed out, and whispers of scandal grew. As chaos mounted, Taylor made the painful choice to confess everything to Ridge, not to rekindle what they had, but to end the lies before they spread. Ridge listened in stunned silence, his eyes clouded with disappointment. He had hurt Taylor many times before, yet hearing her betrayal, even with a man like Deacon, cut deeper than he expected. For a brief moment, he almost admired her honesty, before turning away, knowing that honesty didn't erase damage. In the weeks that followed, Sheila's unraveling became dangerous. She began appearing at Deacon's restaurant uninvited, sometimes at odd hours, muttering about forgiveness and fate. Taylor's fear escalated when she found a photo of herself and Deacon ripped in half on her windshield. She knew this wasn't just emotional warfare anymore. It was a prelude to violence. Hope, still unaware of the full web of betrayal, tried to hold Forrester together. Her runway show finally arrived, a shimmering spectacle of hope and rebirth. The crowd applauded, the press raved, but as the final model walked the runway, Hope's eyes caught a familiar face standing in the back of the room, Sheila, watching her with an unreadable smile. It was a silent warning, a chilling reminder that nothing in Los Angeles stayed buried for long. That night, as Taylor and Deacon sat separately, consumed by guilt and dread, Hope stood under the bright lights of her own success, not realizing the danger that was already circling. Deacon's affair had ignited something in Sheila that could not be undone. And as the lights dimmed and the applause faded, a new chapter was quietly beginning, one that would test the limits of forgiveness, love, and survival. Because in Los Angeles, love wasn't just a feeling. It was a weapon, and everyone was learning how to use it.